We are in resumption, and Mr Murdoch, I apologise to you, Senator Rice, but Senator Rice has got some questions in infrastructure investment, if they can be directed to you, and then we'll proceed with policy.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr Murdoch, for being willing to take my questions now. I'm wanting to go through some of the other programs outlined in the budget papers. So the National Rail Program, as outlined on page 133. So the government have announced this is a $10 billion program.
Yes, that's correct, Senator.
Yes, and yet the forwards show that there is expenditure of $600 million from 2019-20.
That's what is within the forward estimates, and the balance is available from 2021.
So
21-22.
But that, in terms of being beyond the forward estimates, hasn't got any status or standing.
Well, it's a commitment by the government to a $10 billion program, and we took senators through earlier in the day the breakdown of the government's $75 billion program, which includes that allocation to that rail program within that $75 billion.
Yes, but as it stands, over the forwards, it's only a $600 million program rather than a $10 billion program.
That's correct, Senator.
Yes. And why is it not starting until 2019-20, given that there are a number of projects such as Melbourne Metro that Infrastructure Australia have assessed that have been given the tick as being good projects that could have investment being put into them right now?
Well, if I can start with that one, as we've discussed previously, the Victorian Government has now announced to be proceeding to fund the Melbourne Metro itself. So we are working on the basis that that project will be funded by the State of Victoria. In relation to the other projects, late last year the Government announced a series of urban rail planning processes around 5 major cities. That work's yet to take place with jurisdictions. That'll be an important input to the work on projects being developed. At the same time, there are a number of projects which the Commonwealth, and I think you had a conversation with Mr Davies this morning in relation to IA, his view of the readiness of Cross River Rail and the like. So the government has taken the decision that it would be prudent to fund this from the latter years of the forward estimates and then into the following 6-year period.
But even then, the latter years, you're only talking about $600 million out of this $10 billion project.
That will somewhat be dependent on what comes forward from the jurisdictions as to the timing of that investment. If project proposals came forward earlier and the government was able to find room in the budget, then it may consider bringing forward the money. But at this stage, it's profiled that way, Senator.
Okay, so it's really a $600 million project rather than a $10 billion project at this stage?
No, it's a $10 billion program commitment, Senator, and at this stage, $600 million is in the forward estimates. The balance is a significant commitment beyond the forwards.
Okay, moving on to the infrastructure investment program offsets on page 134, which shows a reduction of $1.6 billion in that program. So can you explain where that money is going?
Yes, Senator. If you'll bear with me, I'll just get that detail for you. It's funding a range of measures that are in the budget. Senator, the offsets, there are a number of, if I can take you through those, it is funding the commitment to the Faster Rail Connecting Capital Cities business planning.
So that's the 20 million?
That's the 20 million.
Yep.
The Australian Transport Safety Bureau, additional resourcing. The infrastructure...
So how much, what's that funding?
11.9 over 5 years. Infrastructure Australia, additional funding for reform initiatives and its resourcing base.
That's the 11.9.
The delivery of inland rail, there is funding for the department to deliver the inland rail component, which falls to the department. I can give you this in detail, so including details.
So we've got pretty much out of that 1.6 billion so far, and pretty small Not that I'd like to
No,
decry, $10 million, but it's pretty small change. You're going to have a lot of programs at that amount to add up to 1.6 billion.
I'm coming to the more to the larger numbers. There is the
So the Inland Rail one was...
Inland Rail. I'll get you that number. Calculator. I've got the figures out over the forwards. I'll give you these broken down, perhaps on notice.
Yes.
I'll list them first, and then we can come back to areas particularly interested. There's funding for the Department of Finance to assist the Inland Rail PPP delivery. There's offsets for the department in terms of meeting the cost of the concession of the equity contribution, the public debt interest costs for
Can you give me the amounts as well? For these?
Not readily, because I don't have them totaled. I've just got the titles at the moment. I can get that for you. On Inland Rail, we haven't published those numbers because they relate to, in terms of the equity injection and the profile of that, and also the public debt interest cost parameters of that have not been published.
The revenue, then for
So
departmental.
what's the order of magnitude then of the...
I'd have to take that on notice and seek advice from ministers. That is a budget. The decision in the budget is not for publication.
that's secret. Yep.
There is some departmental funding for delivering the Western Sydney Airport.
So, but the costs of equity as well, is that also a secret one?
Yes, that is not for publication.
Right.
Delivering the Western Sydney Airport, the department's cost in establishing the Western Sydney Airport Company and oversight. There's some additional resourcing for the Department of Finance.
How much are they?
It's 600,000 per year.
600,000.
Yeah, and these are set out in table 1.2 of our PBS
Pages 18 and 19.
of our portfolio budget statement.
Right, okay.
In terms of departmental. There's funding for the Department of Finance for their oversight of the Western Sydney Airport issues. There is the public debt interest costs, which have to be offset for the equity injection into the Western Sydney Airport. That's quite a substantial number, again, which the government has not published. And then we have offsets for the Building Better Regions Fund, $200 million.
200 in the... Okay.
And the Regional Infrastructure Fund, $272 million, as well as some departmental costs in administering those programs. And then we have round 3 of the Stronger Communities program, which is published at $27.7 million. The establishment of the Infrastructure Project Financing Agency in Prime Minister's Department, which is funding of $4.2 million per annum. Some previous cost of for the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, the MH370 search costs, which are in 16-17, $3 million.
How much was that?
3 million.
3 million.
The Sunshine Coast Airport concessional loan, the public debt interest cost, again, not for publication. There's $40 million for supplementary local roads in South Australia. There's $16 million over the forward estimates for Keys to Drive, the road safety program. There is an allocation for the Far North Collector Road project in New South Wales of $13.8 million, and the National Rail Program of $600 million. And there's also a further offset for community development grants following the MyEFO process of 48.6. That totals 1.631. As I say, I'm not in a position to give you the breakdown of the public interest debt or the equity injections. The government has not published those.
Right, okay. So but basically, an awful lot of these other projects that are outlined in the budget are being funded out of that 1.6 billion debt.
That's correct.
So, what's the total new spending on infrastructure in this budget then?
There are a range of the projects. There's new projects. There's the equity injection we've been discussing into Inland Rail. There is the equity injection into the government business enterprise, which will build the Western Sydney Airport, up to $5.3 billion. There is $10 billion National Rail Program.
But that's not in the forward estimates. So over the forwards.
There is $600 million in the forwards.
But the $600 million came out of that 1.6 you just told me.
But it is new allocated funding
But,
to the program.
but we've had this pot of 1.6 that's been reduced. So basically, I want to know what, in addition to that 1.6, in terms of new spending on infrastructure, is in this budget.
There is the $550.2 million for rail projects in Victoria and a further $461 million for Victoria. For further projects in the state, $30 million to develop a business case for the Melbourne Airport Link, additional $20.2 million for the Murray Basin Rail upgrade. There's a commitment of $843 million for additional projects on the Bruce Highway, $20 million, as we've discussed, to support business cases for faster rail services between major cities and regional centres, $13.8 million for the North Collector Road, and $472 million for regional infrastructure package.
Okay, so so we've got the big equity investments in Inland Rail and Western Sydney Airport, isn't it? The equity.
Yes.
Yes, but so in addition, putting those aside, what's the total then of those projects in terms of new spend, additional spend?
It's the 10. It's around. So it includes the 10 billion for National Rail.
No, not the 10 billion for National Rail. I want to know over the forward estimates. And you, as you just said, that 600 million came out of that 1.6
600
pot.
million in the forward estimates.
Yeah, but that came out of the 1.6 pot.
Well, it came out of the final year of the forward estimates. The government has set up a 10-year rolling program, so this is new money allocated in 2021.
But if you've got that 1.6 is over the forward estimates as a reduction, that 600 short, if you just said, is being funded out of that 1.6.
There's essentially a process which has gone on, which is the government has funded the last year of the forward estimates with around $4.46 billion. It has then made some offsets and then put some money back into the program, including the National Rail funding. So that's how you end up with the 2021 allocation.
Okay, it still seems to me that you're double counting that 600 million. If it was, or if you were saying that it was coming out of that offsets, that minus 1.6 billion.
No, I can assure you it's not. But that's the structure of how the final 2021 year has been structured.
Okay, so perhaps then, yeah. Okay, so it would be good to get an itemised list of actual new infrastructure spend in addition to what's being reallocated from that 1.6.
Take that on notice, Senator.
Okay, thank you. So then moving on to the money that's being spent or not spent on Victorian infrastructure investments. So where we have a table that has got zeros in it, lots of dashes, and that provision for this fund for the various projects that are listed underneath there has already been included in the forward estimates. So there's no new funding then that's being allocated to those Victorian infrastructure investments?
It's new funding for infrastructure because previously that was held in the contingency reserve and not allocated to the infrastructure program. So in the budget, this is new funding for infrastructure in that it's been transferred from the contingency reserve previously at MyEFO into the infrastructure investment program to provide the $1 billion for a priority regional and urban infrastructure in Victoria.
Okay, so that's why it doesn't actually appear in your table there, so because it's a transfer from...
Yeah, so it's new money
reserves
for infrastructure, but it had been previously sitting in the asset recycling contingency reserve.
Okay, so essentially it's all the asset recycling, it's the asset recycling money then?
Which was previously, that program had closed, so the government had not previously allocated that. What has occurred in this budget is they've allocated that to infrastructure.
Right. Okay, and tell me, the Victorian government, the federal government, the Victorian government haven't yet come to agreements as to, where this money is going to be spent in terms of the rail projects. That's the case.
That's
isn't
correct,
it?
as we
Yes.
discussed this morning, yes.
So can you take me through the consultation or the negotiation process so far? Why haven't you been able to reach agreement with the Victorian government?
Well, it's only been a couple of weeks, less than 2 weeks since the budget, that we've been working on...
But there's been a history, as you are aware, as
there
Victorians are very well aware.
There is. The Victorian government provided some advice in relation to some regional rail projects that it had developed as part of its regional rail program. The Australian government has proposed an allocation of the initial $500 million for those lines.
So that's not what the Victorian government wanted, was it?
It remains a matter of difference of opinion, I think, in relation to it. The Victorian Government, as you know, in their budget 2 weeks ago, the Victorian Government announced 1.4 for regional rail, but that was all Commonwealth funding,
So,
to which the Commonwealth had not agreed.
right. So you're saying, it seems that this has been happening quite a bit. We have announcements, and rather than a negotiation leading to a shared announcement, you've got, first of all, Victoria making an announcement, and then you announcing a different amount of money in the budget.
That's right, and we have to reach a position on that. Minister Chester has been very clear in his public commentary about seeking to reach an agreement with the Victorian Government in relation to the expenditure of the 500, as well as the additional funds, the additional 461. Minister Chester has written to Victoria. He's had a series of meetings with Victorian ministers, including last Friday, and we are now looking to work through the Victorian proposals and projects to see whether we can reach agreement.
So after the budget, after the various announcements, you decided you have to sit down in the room together.
We maintain a very cordial relationship with the Victorian Government, and we're looking to work with them.
Okay.
Minister Chester's been very clear on the need for a cooperative relationship. I think the Victorian Government took the decision to publish the $1.4 billion in its own budget, for which it had no funding.
How has the process with Victoria differed from the process with Western Australia, where you seem to reach agreement fairly quickly with the McGowan government as to how the money should be spent?
Well, as the government's indicated, the West Australian Government put forward a proposal which the Commonwealth accepted, subject to all of the conditions we discussed this morning in relation to further assessment.
So the difference was that they put forward a proposal to you that you then worked on, rather than just announcing a proposal.
That's correct. There were a series of discussions with the West Australian Government.
Okay, moving on to, in fact, staying there with the Victorian investments, the $30 million for the business case for the airport rail, who's that going to be given to?
That's to be determined. We're looking to develop a joint process with the Victorian Government, and we hope to settle arrangements for the undertaking of that business case very shortly.
Right. So when you say this is to be determined, what are the options as to who's going to be developing it?
Well, if Victoria is interested in working with us in partnership, then we'd envisage it would be a joint Victorian Commonwealth analysis.
And what if they're not?
Then the Commonwealth has indicated it's prepared to work on the business case.
So it would be the Commonwealth itself would work on the business case?
We'd hope not to reach that position. Clearly, given the Victorian knowledge, and they are the owners of the acid rail system in Melbourne, we would hope to be able to work with them in relation to it.
Seems again not to be the best arrangement to announce allocation in the budget without having got the Victorian Government to be on side to... Again,
in the Victorian budget, they announced a $10 million study into the Tullamarine Rail Link, which was Commonwealth money.
Do you know what route you'll be evaluating?
We'll be looking at all routes. There was some planning done previously, as we discussed this morning, which had a heavy rail route from Southern Cross through the suburban network. Alternatively, there are other proponents for other systems which are more direct.
So will the business case be evaluating all of those?
Yeah, that's our intention, is to look at all the options and routes.
With $30 million for a business case given what we heard before about the costs of business cases, do you think that's going to be sufficient if you're evaluating, there must be at least 3 or 4 different options?
Well, based on previous experience and depending on the state of information that's available in Victoria, we believe this should be adequate to undertake the sort of work that we envisage.
And what sort of timeframe does the federal government see? It's obviously a project that you think is important enough to be putting $30 million in. What's the sort of timeframe that you would like to see Airport Rail developed for Melbourne if the business case stacks up?
Well, at this stage, the first stage is this planning work, the business case development, which the government has indicated would take about 2 years of work. That would enable us to reach a decision then on timing of the project, should the business case find an optimal route alignment and a business case which is favourable to a development. And the government's then indicated that would be a project which would be considered for funding under the $10 billion rail program.
Right. So clearly, it's the federal government sees it as an important and a priority project.
As does Infrastructure Australia, as they gave evidence this morning in terms of this being one of their priority areas.
Okay, the Regional Growth Fund, which says will invest $472 million over 4 years from 2017-18. What will the governance arrangements for this Regional Growth Fund look like?
200 million of that regional funding will be provided to the Building Better Regions Fund, which is the government's flagship regional investment program. The remaining $272 million, as described in the budget papers, will be to support larger infrastructure investments in regional areas, particularly to support economic growth and jobs, and also to ensure investment in regions which have growth potential and are going through periods where they are looking to move into other industry sectors.
So that 207. So we've got the Building Better Regions Fund, which has got governance arrangements and criteria.
That's correct.
But how about for this new program then? You've got 272 million going into it.
The Minister is currently considering the approach in relation to it. A deal of work was done in the development of the budget on how the program might operate. Final decisions will be taken by the government very shortly.
So when will those criteria be available?
Soon.
What does soon mean, Minister?
Soon means soon.
When is it expected that the first? Well, I presume there'll be an application process. Will there?
There will indeed, Senator. Look, I'm hoping to have the guidelines finalised as soon as possible. The timing. Does
that mean a week, a month?
Well, look, I'm not going to preempt it. We're going to make sure we get them right, Senator. But I would imagine within the month or so. And in terms of timing, I'm not going to preempt that. I'm hoping potentially in the second half of the year at some point.
For actual allocation or for accepting grant applications?
Well, we've still got to work through all those details, Senator.
So is there money, of that 272, how much is going to be allocated in this financial year then?
The profile in the budget papers has $19.8 million in 17-18.
So that's for both the money that's going into the Building Better Regions and
correct.
this other.
That's
so
correct.
would you expect that to be split,
Look, that'll be a matter.
50-50 as the 200 versus 272?
That will be a matter. The governments will shortly receive the assessment of the first round of Building Better Regions. That will obviously inform the government's timing in relation to any future rounds of that program. So I think that at this stage the profile is across the forward estimates for the two components. Details of how that'll split out are yet to be taken.
Okay. And in terms of that $272 million fund, who will be the final decision makers as to what grants are allocated?
There is a ministerial panel which determines regional grant applications under the BBRF.
But that's for the 200. For the 272, will that be?
Decisions are yet to be taken, but we would envisage the ministerial panel also being involved as the decision-making process for the other investment program.
So you'll essentially have a panel with two streams of grant application that will be assessing two streams of grant applications.
The ministerial panel, as they do now, look at various regional programs as they come forward.
Right, and but essentially, so you'll have the one panel, and you'll have these two streams of different.
That's correct.
Different grants that will be assessed with different criteria, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah. And what compliance mechanisms will be in place to ensure that grant recipients comply, spend the money in accordance with the terms of the grant?
Well, we apply the Commonwealth Grant Guidelines as well as the provisions of the PGPA Act, which prescribe Commonwealth requirements in relation to grant administration. Our department applies those very successfully across a series of programs. We'll do that with this, including evaluation and audit processes once grants are acquitted.
Okay, so the same processes are in place for other grants at the
For
moment?
other grant programs, as you know, we run a series of grant programs ranging from bridges right through to Building Better Regions.
Okay. And finally, just the ongoing saga of the Port Rail shuttle in Melbourne. So in February, you said that you understood that work was about to start happening now that we've had the sale of the Port of Melbourne. So I think you said that some work on the Port Rail Shuttle was imminent. So have you got any updates as to what's happening?
My understanding is work is underway, Senator.
What work?
This is to provide access into the Somerton terminal by VicTrack. That work is underway, is my understanding, which will enable the first stages of that rail shuttle to start very shortly.
So do you know any more details of what that work is? Because certainly some stakeholders that I have aren't aware of that work actually beginning.
It involves some track work into the site. I can take on notice and get you a more detailed answer, Senator.
Okay. And in terms of the Dandenong part of the Port Rail Shuttle, have you got any information about whether that is still within scope of the Port Rail Shuttle?
I'm sorry, Senator, I'm not familiar with the Dandenong.
Well, essentially the Port Rail Shuttle, I think, was... and my understanding of the works that are needed is you need to have the connections to Somerton in the north, Dandenong in the southeast, and Laverton or Derrimut in the west.
Right.
And so the Dandenong, there's works going on the Dandenong line at the moment with the level crossings removal program, and we have been told that it doesn't look like they are taking into account the need for rail freight operations down to Dandenong.
I'm not familiar with the work that's being undertaken in relation to freight, so I'll take that on notice.
So you don't. Okay,
I
no
don't-
information about the connection, the freight connection into Dandenong, and
No,
how
I
that
don't. Sorry, I'll
is
seek
part of the
advice.
Port Rail Shuttle.
I'll seek advice from the Victorian Government.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Good, thanks, Senator Rice. That concludes that section.